This Saturday marked Prime Minister Carney's first year in office, and the reviews are in.
We get to see the maple trees, maple sugar on the maple leaves. We got the biggest wheat fields growing tall. In Canada, where we see the reversing falls. In Canada, we get to see them all.
G'day, eh? While most Canadians are happy with the direction Carney and his government have set for Canada, others say he hasn't done enough to address issues that are facing everyday Canadians. Much of his first year has been in response to and in spite of the shifting demands from the taco toddlers, inconsistent tariffs, insults and threats to our economy and our sovereignty. And Carney made it clear in his first year that his goal is to grow our exports abroad, and is largely focused on trying to open up and expand foreign markets, secure existing ones, and improve competitiveness through efficiencies, and to reduce interprovincial barriers to help alleviate with the losses from the empty tariffs. In his memorable speech at Davos, Carney emphasized that the old ways of doing things are over and that there's been a rupture in the past agreements and partnerships, and described his visions in terms of variable geometry in trade and defense allies.
What we saw at Davos today is the Prime Minister of Canada laying out a different approach to his country's foreign policy going forward. He referred to it as variable geometry, trying to make different coalitions for different issues, perhaps with different partners around the world on a case-by-case basis. And later in the speech, he had a section where he tried to speak specifically to the moment in terms of Trump's threats against Greenland. And this was kind of one of a few moments where we could kind of hear the audience react to that. When he talked about standing with the sovereignty of Greenland and Denmark when it comes to the Arctic and supporting their right to determine the future, and the commitment to Article 5 of NATO being unwavering on Canada's part. But nevertheless, talking about, and here's where he improved a bit from his speech text, Canada would be, he said, part of an effort to have, as he put it, boots on the ice, that it recognizes that it has an important role to play on NATO's northern and western flanks, and reminding people of something that we've been talking about since the federal budget last fall, which is the $80 billion earmarked by the Carney government, an amount staggering for those of us who have covered defense budgets up till now, in its scope and its size and its ambition. But this idea that Canada is going to get serious, and where a lot of that money is going to be spent is in the north. And for example, his minister for Northern Economic Development, Rebecca Chartrand, yesterday was floating the idea that we would have a base at Churchill again, not just a deep water port to ship out our resources, but a military base there. That is the sort of thing that you get into if you are really going to meaningfully bolster NATO's north and western flank.
First year, he spent about 20% of his time, or 26 days, outside of the Canada on 26 trips to other countries, some more than once. In the following order, he's been to France, London, UK, Vatican City, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, Germany, Latvia, Mexico, United States, UK, US again, Egypt, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, UAE, South Africa, United States again, France, China, Qatar, Switzerland, India, Australia, and Japan, and is now wrapping up a trip to Norway and the UK before taking a little personal March break in Rome. Back in September of 25, Carney and Mexican President Claudius Sheinbaum signed a strategic partnership, the Canada-Mexico Action Plan 2025-28, to 2028, deepening economic security and trade ties and strengthening a united front ahead of the 2026 Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, C-U-S-M-A, coming up this summer. And while Trudeau had frosty relations with India and China, for good reason, Carney determined it was time to get over those problems, and he invited Prime Minister Modi to attend a G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta, last June, even though India is not a G7 member. And Modi's government has been accused by Canada of extortion, coercion, and even murder. Modi and Delhi earlier this year, the two countries agreed to work toward better relations on security, critical minerals, technology, and improved trade, including a plan to push ahead with a free trade deal by the end of next year. And less than 2 months earlier, in an historic trip to China, Carney had reached agreements in Beijing with President Xi Jinping on tourism, cultural exchanges, improved diplomatic relations, and a reset of the trading relationship.
Carney came to China with one key objective, and that was to get rid of punishing tariffs on Canadian canola. Canadian canola producers have been paying tariffs 75 to 100%, depending on the product, and those tariffs are coming down now to 15% starting on March the 1st. And it's not just canola, there are other Canadian agricultural and agri-food products where we will also see Chinese tariffs drop. Think about lobster, think about some other seafood products. So that's good news. Agricultural products that have been facing steep tariffs, they will be coming off. Now the quid pro quo in that is that China wanted to sell more electric vehicles into the Canadian market. The Canadian market is not going to be wide open to Chinese EVs, but the Carney government has agreed to allow 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles to be exported to Canada. So that's the cap, 49,000. That represents about 3% of the Canadian market, not very big, and that will grow over the years, but it will still stay in low percentage terms. So Scott Moe, the Saskatchewan Premier, who was here with Mark Carney, he's going to be happy about the canola deal. We'll see where Ontario Premier Doug Ford lands on the Chinese EVs. Ford had warned that dropping all the tariffs on Chinese EVs could have decimated the Canadian auto industry. But that hasn't happened. Just a small fraction of Chinese EVs will be coming into the Canadian market.
Also in Carney's recent portmanteau are trade or industrial deals with Australia, Qatar, Indonesia, and the European Union. He signed a partnership deal in Japan on defense, energy, trade, and technology just this past week, and even spoke a little Japanese. He actually did live there for a while.
They kicked out America and chose Canada. Not one country, three. Japan, Australia, India. In 10 days, Mark Carney signed deals on 3 continents, billions of dollars, strategic partnerships, defense agreements, energy contracts. Japan's brand new prime minister rejected every world leader's request and let Carney through the door first. Australia invited him to address their parliament, a stage reserved for Churchill, for Obama, for no Canadian leader in almost 20 years. India signed the largest uranium deal in Canadian history. And American automakers are now leaving Canada so fast that 77% of every car built in this country is Japanese. This is what happens when you tell a country it has nowhere else to go. 51st state. We do not need Canada. Be grateful. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, cars, lumber. The trade agreement called irrelevant. Negotiations frozen for months. All built on one bet. Canada has nowhere else to go. So Carney boarded a plane, flew east, and the last stop told the whole story. Japan just elected a new prime minister, Takaichi Sanae. Biggest landslide in the country's post-war history. Every leader on earth wanted to be the first one she met. She chose Carney, not the American president, not a single European leader, the prime minister of Canada. The country Trump calls the 51st state walked through that door before anyone else on the planet. He told Takaichi that Canada will double LNG exports this decade and double again the decade after. This is not starting from zero. Mitsubishi already owns 15% of the massive LNG Canada terminal in British Columbia. Japan is already invested. This partnership takes an existing foundation and scales it into a strategic energy alliance. Canada replaced the United States as Japan's #1 supplier of wheat and pork. 10% of everything Japan eats now comes from Canadian soil. The country America said nobody needs is feeding Japan more than America is.
Even with all of these historic talks and agreements being made, there are those that question, as in an article in the Hubs, it questions whether Carney has managed to start to pull Canada away from its dependency on trade with America, and what results and deliverables has the Prime Minister actually secured for Canada in the last year for all of the days he spent abroad. International trade accounts for roughly 65% of our GDP, and so far Canada's exports to the US still made up to 72% of total exports in 2025, down from 76% of the year prior, driven by a decline of goods sent down south and an increase in products exchanged in other regions, primarily Europe. Exports to the US fell by about 16% in 2025, year over year, but exports to non-US countries actually rose by about 17%. University of Toronto economics professor Joseph Steinberg told the Hub, "How much of this is temporary reallocation versus long-term diversification is hard to say at this point. And of course, exports to the US account for about 3/4 of our overall total exports, so the latter doesn't come close to making up for the former." And though he believes Carney's on the right track, he says it's too early to celebrate, adding that the trade with the US should still be foremost, saying Carney's primary focus should be on renegotiating CUSMA, or at least in keeping it alive until Trump leaves office. Losing Kuzma would hurt our economy more than any potential trade agreements with other countries could possibly help it. Steinberg sees diversifying the bulk of Canada's trade elsewhere outside of the States to be a foolhardy exercise. Well, Steinberg may still want to make deals with knuckleheads and thugs like Hoekstra and Besant, but according to a survey by Angus Reid, a majority of Canadians prefer a hardline approach. 63% believe that in negotiations with the U.S., Canada should take a hard line and refuse difficult concessions rather than a soft conciliatory approach. 7% of Canadians think a new economic partnership with the U.S. remains a top priority, but another 50% support engaging in trade with other partners, such as India, to reduce reliance on U.S. And the economic impact, with 82% of Canadians believing U.S. tariffs had a significant impact on the Canadian economy, there's high pressure on the government to secure a deal that protects industries like steel and auto. Other aspects of Carney's leadership have had lower grades, and even so, they remain either stable or not significantly worse, such as affordability of key items such as food, gas, or shelter. According to the National Post, the latest Consumer Price Index figures show that prices were up 2.3% in January compared to a year earlier, matching the Bank of Canada's preferred for modest inflation. However, food inflation has been the highest in the G7, which is a message the Conservatives have been hammering in the House of Commons, and grocery prices will continue to rise at an elevated level. Prices shot up dramatically during the pandemic, and even though supply chain issues have been resolved, prices have not fallen back, and housing remains unaffordable or prohibitive for millions, including and particularly young Canadians. On the environment, Carney claimed to be both an internationally renowned financial expert and someone who cares strongly about the environment. But he canceled the consumer carbon tax, which had been a deterrent to the use of gas and other carbon-based fuels, and he moved away from EV mandates towards consumer rebates, while halting the federal fossil fuel emissions cap and supporting new oil infrastructure. Environmentalists say that Carney's first year in office has been a step back, and longtime environmental activist and Trudeau's former environmental minister, Stephen Guilbeault, quit Carney's cabinet in November after the PM signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Alberta on energy and pipelines.
All right, we've got breaking news from Ottawa right now. We're just receiving word that Federal Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, who is long time an environmental activist, previously with Greenpeace, has resigned from cabinet. There is word that he is going to stay on as an MP, but he is stepping down of his role in cabinet. He is no longer the Minister of the Environment. He was previously, but he does not want to remain in cabinet. Now, that is a strong indication of his reaction to today's announcement of a memorandum of understanding from Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta's Premier Daniel Smith. Here are some highlights of that memorandum of understanding. That there's going to be a construction of one or more pipelines from Alberta to BC's northwest coast, moving at least 1 million barrels a day of low-emissions Alberta bitumen, carbon capture process to offset the emissions. Along with this, Alberta will also sign on to an industrial carbon pricing agreement while Ottawa suspend, and this is a key issue here, probably for Guilbeault, clean electricity regulations in that province. In fact, what we're hearing is that many of the environmental regulations that were put in place from the Trudeau administration, from his era, will be clawed back here, and potentially the tanker ban that's in place in the northwest coast of BC, in the Hecate Strait. So that's a body of water between Haida Gwaii, the island, and the mainland of the northwest BC coast. To enable the passage of tankers coming from from a pipeline, they would need to lift that tanker ban. And there was a suggestion here that if a pipeline did in fact come to place, that would be lifted. So, news breaking out of Ottawa just moments ago.
On the plus side, his government has maintained or advanced some environmental commitments, such as the goal of protecting 30% of all land and water by the end of this decade. With under economic growth and standard of living, real wages and pay changes compared to inflation improved slightly in 2025, but there's still a way to go to catch up to the buying power losses from the pandemic's inflation. Unemployment and inflation have been in relatively good shape, though food and housing prices remain a problem, and Canada's unemployment rate rose to 6.7% in February, with the loss of 83,900 jobs.
At recent job fairs across the country, plenty of job seekers have turned out, hoping to get hired amid a sharp slowdown in employment.
A lot of people are eager and ready to work.
The unexpected plunge in positions, driving up February's unemployment rate from 6.5 to 6.7%, after experts had forecast job gains for the economy.
I thought we'd had actually more than 10,000. So to see us shed 85, I mean, it's a moment in time. but there's very, very little good news you can pull from this one.
The losses were broad-based across industries, including the services sector and manufacturing. Quebec led the way with a drop of 57,000 jobs, while BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba also slipped. In Ontario, employment held steady, though the unemployment rate rose to 7.6% as more people looked for work.
It's been harrowing. It's been dehumanizing.
Zara Boksh lost her job as an administrative assistant 6 years ago, and since then hasn't been able to find a full-time job. The harsh winter weather in part being blamed, along with trade uncertainty with the U.S. and the softening housing market.
I don't believe we're in a recession, but clearly the economy is struggling out of the gate in 2026.
And some worry the fallout from the fighting in the Middle East could further impact the economy.
Still, despite the job losses, the national unemployment rate is roughly where it was a year ago, and hourly wages are actually up 3.9% year over year.
The current government has vowed to make infrastructure decisions more quickly, has worked more effectively with provinces and territories, and set up an approval office to advance that cause. But so far, as might be expected with big builds of this nature, it's been mostly promises, plans, and approvals of projects that were already underway more than a year ago. As for housing, the Prime Minister set out an ambitious target of building 500,000 homes a year over the next decade, and launched the Build Canada Homes initiative, a $13 billion program intended to make it easier and quicker to build homes, especially less costly units for middle and lower income Canadians, though there's still a lot of provincial hurdles to solve. And the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, a Crown corporation that acts as the country's national housing agency, reported that housing starts jumped 6% in 2025, largely due to increases in rental apartments and in the middle housing category. That includes low-rise apartments and multiplexes. Defense and security. After Trump returned to office and jeered at and threatened NATO allies over their defense spending deficiencies, well, in all truth, Canada was not prioritizing that, mostly due to our over-reliance on U.S. co-defense. But the Don Roe Doctrine's plans to annex Greenland and Canada forced Carney's government to pivot quickly.
The Liberal defense strategy is expected to be announced later this week and will feature sweeping changes to how it supports the domestic defense industry. The $6.6 billion strategy aims to help small and medium-sized Canadian businesses break into the defense industry. It pledges it will create 125,000 jobs. The goal is to shift away from relying too much on the U.S. for military gear. Retired Major General David Fraser. Major General, thank you for being here.
Well, Renee, I think this is a great step forward for the Canadian government to support Canadian industry, and it really builds on the 2013 defense study by Jenkins on procurement and building on the 6 key industrial capabilities in this country. And now we're talking about aerospace, UAS, software, ammunition, and it really is going to be an input into wealth creation for things that Canadians need and not just things that go bang. So if the government does this, it's going to be a real economic stimulus package like we haven't seen since probably World War II. Making our own ammunition as opposed to buying it from United States or other countries in the world. So, this is where Canada is actually taking away some of the risk and the exposure of only having one trading partner to have multiple trading partners. And Canada has done this in the past, and this is just good news for Canada. It will strengthen our economy.
We're rebuilding, rearming, and reinvesting in the Canadian Armed Forces, including pay hikes for military personnel, and applications to join the Canadian Armed Forces are up by 13%.
As tensions rise around the world and next door, the Canadian Armed Forces are seeing a spike in interest.
We're hitting record highs of Canadians wanting to join the military.
Go up the hill right to the crest.
Numbers obtained by Global News show recruitment hit its highest level in a decade. More than 6,700 people enrolled in the regular forces between April 2024 and March 2025, surpassing the military's goal of nearly 6,500. It's not clear when military members will get that raise. Defense analysts say if Carney wants to make good on his pledge to rebuild the military and reach 2030 personnel targets, he can't afford to lose any more members already there. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
Committed to spending $19 billion on Lockheed Martin F-35 jets from the U.S., and in March of 26, the government confirmed the acquisition of Bombardier Global 6500 jets for the National Research Council, NRC, for defense research, in addition to 6 previously ordered for the Air Force to replace older Challenger aircraft. The purpose of the NRC jet will support defense technology development, including anti-drone capabilities. This week, Carney was in Yellowknife, where he announced $40 billion for Arctic infrastructure and defense spending.
We are announcing a series of transformative initiatives that will help unlock the full potential of this vast region. We're moving forward with an ambitious new plan, backed by more than $40 billion of investments in Canada's North and Arctic. Investments to defend our sovereignty and to deter new threats. Investments to connect, build, and transform Northern and Arctic communities. With this plan, we are taking control of our future. We will no longer rely on others to defend our Arctic security or to fuel our economy. These defense investments will strengthen our military's presence, and at the same time, what they will require is new energy infrastructure, new broadband, new telecommunication services, new wastewater services. What that means is as we build these military operations, we can transform and benefit the surrounding communities.
And now he's overseas again. He stopped in Norway, where he met with German and Norwegian leaders to discuss Arctic defense partnerships.
We're recognizing at the same time the value of our strength. We're all investing heavily in our defense and security, and we all recognize that we are much stronger together.
And also met with the Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store on investment, trade, critical minerals, clean energy, and more. And speaking to reporters on Saturday, he also pitched Canada as a low-risk oil producer during the Iran conflict.
From Norway's perspective, from Canada's perspective, we are low-risk producers of oil. We are low-risk producers of natural gas. We're reliable. We can produce. We're in jurisdictions where what we produce will go to market, and we can deliver it to market. And that is a contribution in a world which has lost, in effect, in the oil case, 15% potentially, some buffer on that of its oil flow.
A scorecard on Substack was set up, and it sorts the government's first-year agenda into major policy areas and distinguishes between 4 different things: campaign promises, post-election mandate commitments, budget 2025 measures, and year one governing actions. The end result shows that Carney has completed 33 of 24 true year one items, with only the U.S. tariffs and CUSMA positioning left, which is assessed as materially advancing. His multi-year items are also advancing or progressing on schedule. Though long-term horizons and mandate term are not year one tests, the relevant question is whether architecture, funding, institutions, negotiation tracks, or project pipelines are in place, and in most cases they are. And let's not forget that 4 MPs now have crossed the floor to join the Liberals, 3 from the UCP, Conservative Party, and just last week, Laurie Idlut, an NDP, New Democrat for Nunavut, was welcomed aboard after feedback from her constituents.
There were definitely a lot of factors. The biggest one, though, is for me just the sheer number of people of my constituents that had been asking me to cross the floor since after the election results.
So while Conservatives, Greens, NDP, and even some Liberals may have some valid criticisms over certain issues and policies, I personally couldn't be happier with the moves this former goalkeeper has been making with the new partnerships and strengthening commitments with allies and the coalition of the willing and showing the world what Canada's made of. And we're not the least bit sorry either, eh? The puck stops here. Elbows up.
Hey, yeah, you. Before you click away to watch someone unbox a tactical toothbrush, let's talk about something real. Political Drain isn't just another content mill. We're a digital front in a very real war. Not with bullets, but with ideas, with action, and with solidarity. We pair urgent news with critical education. And we build community around actual resistance, not the hashtag kind. The kind that moves. But here's the thing. None of this is free. It isn't. Behind every video is time, labor, research, and some weird guy asking if we're going to pay the hosting bill. And yeah, some of that money goes to things we can't necessarily say out loud. If you know, you know. Let's just say our special ops aren't Call of Duty LARPers. They're people making real moves to protect, uplift, and organize. You're not just funding a channel. You're funding a resistance network in a world where capital still calls the shots. Unfortunately, in a system built on artificial scarcity, even mutual aid has a price tag. And if we want to grow, if we want to win, we need your help. We need your help. So if you've got even a few bucks to spare, toss it our way. It's not for ads, it's not for merch drops, but for people making moves in the shadows so others can do it in the light. It's just us and you. So fund the mission, fund the fight, fund the future, because nobody's coming to save us. We save each other. That's how this works.